I look at the wrinkled hand holding mine, and it's hard to believe these fingers were once the only things that kept me from falling apart. Today, at 78 years old, sitting in our warm apartment in Paris, I'm just an old woman with a cane and too many memories. But inside, I'm still that terrified girl of 18 who made a choice that shook a kingdom. People think fairy tales are about finding a prince, but my story is about escaping one. It's about the kind of love that doesn't just open doors, but tears down stone walls. Before I tell you how we ran away with nothing but the clothes on our backs, I'd love for you to join our journey by following the channel RP, Forbidden Romances. My name is Elena, and once upon a time, I was Her Royal Highness, the Crown Princess of Sarkovia. To the world, I had everything a girl could want: silk dresses, jewels, and a palace. But the truth was much colder. I was a prisoner in a gilded cage, living in a country where winter seemed to last forever, and warmth was something I wasn't allowed to feel. Let me take you back to 1966. Sarkovia was a small, mountainous principality hidden in Eastern Europe, a place where time seemed to have stopped a century before. While the rest of the world was listening to rock and roll and fighting for civil rights, my home was silent and gray. The castle walls were 3 feet thick, built to keep enemies out, but they did a much better job of keeping me in. My life was a series of rules: sit straight, speak softly, and never, ever forget who you are. My father, the king, ruled our home like a military camp. He was a man who believed that affection made people weak, especially women. To him, I wasn't a daughter to be loved. I was a political asset to be traded. I grew up fearing the sound of his heavy boots echoing in the hallway. I learned to make myself small, to hide my thoughts behind a mask of polite indifference. But there was one place where I couldn't be tamed, one place where my heart actually beat faster. In that frozen prison, I had only one way to breathe. His name was Eclipse. He was a massive black stallion, wild and temperamental, a creature that most of the stable hands were afraid to touch. But with me, he was gentle. Riding was the only hobby I was technically allowed, though my father constantly criticized how I did it. He wanted me to ride side saddle, slow and elegant, like a porcelain doll on display. But I didn't want to be elegant. I wanted to be fast. I remember one specific afternoon in late November, when the sky was the color of bruised iron. I had slipped away from my lessons, desperate to escape the suffocating heat of the fireplaces and the endless lectures on etiquette. I saddled Eclipse myself, my hands shaking with adrenaline. We burst out of the stables and galloped toward the tree line. The wind bit at my cheeks, freezing the tears I didn't even know I was crying. For an hour, I wasn't a princess. I was just a girl flying over the snow. But freedom in Sarkovia always came with a price. When I returned to the stables, flushed and breathless, the illusion shattered instantly. The stable master wasn't there to take the reins. Instead, my father was waiting. He stood in the center of the yard, wrapped in a fur coat that made him look like a bear, his face purple with silent rage. He watched me slide off the horse, my boots covered in mud, my hair a mess of wind-blown tangles. He didn't yell. That would have been better, honestly. Yelling I could handle. Instead, he spoke in that low, icy voice that made my blood run cold. He told me I looked like a peasant, not a future queen. He asked me if I thought it was appropriate for a lady to sweat, to pant, to ride with her legs apart like a common soldier. I tried to apologize, to say I just needed some air, but he cut me off with a sharp wave of his gloved hand. He walked closer, his boots crunching on the straw, and grabbed Eclipse's bridle roughly. The horse panicked, rearing up, but my father yanked him down with brutal force. He looked me dead in the eye and delivered his sentence. He said that if I ever rode like a man again, if I ever returned to the castle looking so wild and unkempt, he wouldn't punish me. He would simply sell Eclipse to the glue factory the very next morning. I stood there, covered in mud and shame, feeling a piece of my soul crack. Eclipse nudged my shoulder with his velvet nose. sensing my distress, but I couldn't even pet him. I knew my father wasn't bluffing. He would take the only living thing I loved and destroy it just to teach me a lesson about obedience. I felt a scream building in my throat, but I swallowed it down, tasting the bitterness of my own helplessness. I turned and ran. I didn't walk with the grace of a princess. I bolted like a frightened child. I needed to hide. I needed to scrub the mud off my skin before anyone else saw my failure. I ran through the stone corridors, ignoring the startled looks of the guards, desperate to reach the sanctuary of my bedroom. I burst through the heavy oak doors, expecting to be alone with my misery. But I wasn't. Someone was already there. She was standing by the window, silhouetted against the gray light, holding a silver hairbrush. It was Dara. She turned when I slammed the door, her eyes wide with surprise. She saw me in my ruined riding clothes, shaking and on the verge of collapse. And in that moment, the air in the room changed. I wasn't looking at a servant, and she wasn't looking at a princess. She was the only person in the world who saw the girl beneath the crown. And for the first time, I wanted to let her see me break. I stood there, shivering not just from the cold that clung to my riding habit, but from the aftershocks of my father's cruelty. In any other room in the castle, a servant would have looked away or curtsied in terrified silence, pretending not to see the mud on the royal carpets. But Dara didn't lower her eyes. She looked at the dirt smeared across my cheek and the tremor in my hands, and without saying a word, she set the hairbrush down on the velvet vanity. Her calm presence was the only thing anchoring me to the floor. She moved with a quiet efficiency that I had always admired. While I tried to control my breathing, Dara went to the adjoining bathroom and turned on the taps. The sound of rushing water was the first comfort I had heard all day. She poured oils into the tub, the scent of lavender and rosemary drifting out to mix with the smell of wet wool and horse sweat that clung to me. It was a sharp, herbal smell that cut through the panic rising in my chest. When she returned, she didn't wait for a command. She knelt before me and began to unlace my heavy riding boots. Her hands were warm and rough, the hands of someone who worked, contrasting sharply with my own useless, pale fingers. I watched the top of her head, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that couldn't quite hide the softness of her neck. As she pulled the muddy boots off, I felt a physical weight lift from my body, though the heaviness in my heart remained. I stepped out of the ruined clothes, leaving the puddle of melting snow and mud on the floor. Dara gathered them up quickly, promising to clean them before the head housekeeper could see the damage. I sank into the hot water of the porcelain tub, closing my eyes as the heat seeped into my frozen bones. For a moment, the image of my father's angry purple face faded, replaced by the steam rising around me. This bathroom was the only place in the entire principality where I felt safe. Dara returned with a sponge and a bar of simple soap. She moved behind me, and I felt the gentle pressure of the sponge against my back. She scrubbed away the sweat of the ride, her touch rhythmic and soothing. It was intimate, yet innocent, a ritual we had performed 1,000 times since we were children. But today, the silence felt different. It was heavy with the words I was too afraid to say, and the anger I was too conditioned to suppress. "He said he would sell him," I whispered, my voice echoing slightly off the tiled walls. I didn't need to explain who he was. "He said if I ride like that again, he'll send Eclipse to the glue factory." I brought my knees to my chest, hugging them under the water. The thought of my beautiful wild horse being led away to slaughter because of my rebellion made tears prick my eyes again. Dara paused in her scrubbing. I felt her hand rest momentarily on my shoulder, a breach of protocol that felt like a lifeline. "He says many things when he's angry, Highness," she said softly. Her voice was low and rich, a stark contrast to the high-pitched fake tones of the court ladies. "Eclipse is the finest horse in the stable. The king knows his value. He wouldn't throw away gold just to prove a point." "He would," I countered. turning my head slightly to catch a glimpse of her. He hates anything he can't control. He hates Eclipse, and he hates me. The water suddenly felt not like a sanctuary, but like another trap. I stood up, water cascading off my skin, and reached for the towel Dara held out. She wrapped it around me, pulling it tight, cocooning me against the drafty air of the castle. We moved back to the bedroom, to the vanity table with the large gilded mirror. I sat down, staring at my reflection, a pale, frightened girl with wet hair plastered to her skull. Dara stood behind me, picking up the silver brush again. She began to detangle my long hair, starting from the ends, and working her way up with infinite patience. The rhythmic swish-swish of the bristles was hypnotic. It was the sound of order being restored to chaos. I watched her in the mirror. Her expression was focused, her dark eyes tracking the movement of the brush through my light hair. The contrast between us was stark. My pallor against her deep, radiant skin, my silk robe against her gray uniform. "Eclipse is the only friend I have here, Dara," I confessed, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "When I'm on him, I'm free. Without him, I'm just furniture in this house. I have no one." The brushing stopped. The room went completely still, save for the wind howling outside the window. In the mirror, Dara's eyes lifted and locked with mine. It wasn't the deferential look of a servant. It was the intense, burning gaze of a woman who saw right through me. Her fingers lingered in my hair, her thumb brushing against the nape of my neck, sending a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "You're not alone, Elena," she whispered, dropping the formal title for the first time in years. Her voice was trembling slightly, terrified but brave. "You have never been alone. You have me." The air between us suddenly felt charged, electric, and dangerous. I stared at her reflection, my heart hammering against my ribs, realizing that the heat I was feeling wasn't from the bath anymore. It was something entirely new, and it terrified me more than my father ever could. 3 weeks passed, and the winter tightened its grip on the castle, burying the world outside in white silence. Inside, however, the noise was deafening. My father summoned me to his private study on a Tuesday morning, a room that smelled permanently of stale cigar smoke and cold leather. The summons wasn't a request. It was an order delivered by the head of the guard. As I walked down the long, drafty corridor, my stomach twisted into tight knots. I had a terrible feeling that the other shoe was about to drop, and the temporary peace I had found in the stables and in my bedroom was about to end. When I entered, my father was standing by the fireplace, holding a crystal glass of brandy, looking unusually pleased with himself. That was always worse than his anger. His happiness usually meant he had won something, and in his game of chess, I was just a pawn to be sacrificed. He didn't ask me to sit. He simply turned, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light, and announced that my future had been secured. He spoke the words as if he were discussing the sale of cattle. "Prince Stefan of Ostrov," he said, savoring the name like fine wine. "The contract was signed an hour ago. You will marry him in the spring." The name hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I stopped breathing for a moment. I knew who Prince Stefan was. I had met him once, 2 years ago, during a diplomatic hunt. He was a man with cold, watery eyes and a cruel mouth. I remembered watching him kick a stray dog that had gotten too close to his boots, laughing while the animal yelped in pain. A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't just an arranged marriage to a stranger, it was a sentence to life with a monster. I tried to speak, to find a logical argument that might penetrate my father's wall of arrogance. I told him that rumors about Stefan's temper were known across 3 kingdoms. I tried to appeal to his pride, suggesting that linking our family to a man with such a dark reputation might tarnish our name. My voice shook, but I forced the words out, desperate to save my own life. My father laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. He walked over to his massive oak desk and picked up a heavy document, tossing it toward me. He didn't care about Stefan's temper. He cared about the iron mines that Stefan's family owned. He explained, with chilling pragmatism, that our principality was bankrupt and that my womb was the price of our economic survival. He looked at me with absolute indifference and said, "Women don't think, Elena. Women obey and generate heirs. Your opinion is irrelevant." I felt the blood drain from my face. I was standing in a room full of expensive antiques, wearing a dress that cost more than a peasant's house, yet I was the poorest person in the kingdom. I had no voice, no rights, and no future. The walls of the study seemed to close in on me, suffocating me with the weight of centuries of tradition. I realized then that my father didn't see a daughter standing before him. He saw a transaction. In the corner of the room, almost blending into the shadows, stood Dara. She had been summoned to serve drinks, rendered invisible by her uniform and her station. But I saw her. While my father ranted about borders and trade agreements, my eyes sought hers. She stood rigid, holding a silver tray against her chest like a shield. Her face was composed, trained to show nothing, but her eyes were screaming. She had heard everything. She knew I was being sold to a man who hurt defenseless things for fun. I saw her knuckles turn white as she gripped the tray, a silent testament to the rage she couldn't express. It broke my heart more than my father's cruelty. I was dragging her into my nightmare. If I married Stefan, I would be taken to his country, and I would likely never see Dara again. The thought was more terrifying than the marriage itself. My father raised his glass in a mock toast to me. "Smile, daughter," he commanded. "You are going to be a queen." I forced my lips to curve upward, a grotesque imitation of joy, because I knew that if I cried, he would only despise me more. I felt like a doll with a cracked porcelain face. I curtsied, my knees trembling, and turned to leave, needing to vomit or scream, or perhaps both. As I passed Dara near the door, time seemed to slow down. My father had already turned his back to look at the fire, satisfied with his business deal. For a split second, Dara's mask slipped. She didn't look at the floor as protocol demanded. She looked straight at me, and I saw a single, solitary tear track its way down her cheek. It was a silent cry of mourning for the life we hadn't even started living yet. That tear burned me. It was the only honest thing in that room. It told me that while my father owned my title and my hand, he didn't own my soul. Dara did. I walked out of the study with my head high, not out of pride, but out of a sudden, desperate clarity. I knew in that moment that I would rather die in the snow than let that man touch me. The heavy door clicked shut behind me, sealing the deal. But in my mind, another contract had just been written. I wasn't going to be a queen. I was going to be a fugitive. I leaned against the cold stone wall of the corridor, gasping for air. The image of Dara's tears seared into my memory. The cage was locked, but they had forgotten that I held the key to the wildest thing in the kingdom, and I wasn't afraid to use it. The days that followed were a blur of suffocating activity. The castle, usually quiet as a tomb, was suddenly infested with strangers. Dressmakers from Vienna, pastry chefs from the capital, and diplomats with fake smiles crowded the hallways. I felt like a prize mare being groomed for an auction. I stood on a podium for hours while women with mouths full of pins poked and prodded me, measuring my waist and complaining that I was too thin. They draped me in heavy silks and stiff brocades, layers of fabric that felt more like armor than clothing. I dissociated during those fittings. I learned to stare at a spot on the wallpaper, a small water stain shaped like a cloud, and let my mind drift away. I imagined I was on a cliffs, galloping through the forest, the cold air stinging my lungs. But every time a pin pricked my skin, I was dragged back to reality. I heard them whispering about Prince Stefan, about how lucky I was, about the Grand Alliance. They didn't know they were sewing a shroud, not a wedding dress. The only time I could breathe was at night. When the last seamstress left and the candles burned low, I would retreat to my bedroom, bolting the door behind me. That click of the lock was the best sound in the world. Inside, Dara would be waiting. The dynamic between us had shifted completely since the day in the study. We were no longer mistress and servant. We were two soldiers in a foxhole, waiting for the enemy to attack. The formality had melted away, leaving only a raw, terrified honesty. One evening, while the wind howled against the stone walls, Dara did something reckless. She went to her small cot in the corner of the dressing room and reached under the mattress. She pulled out a small, rectangular piece of paper, its edges worn soft from being touched 1,000 times. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and pride, then walked over and placed it in my hand. It was a postcard. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. On one side, a grainy color photograph showed a tall iron tower piercing a blue sky, surrounded by buildings with gray zinc roofs. "Paris," she whispered, the word sounding like a prayer. "My Aunt Antoinette sent it 3 years ago, before the mail from the West was restricted. She lives there." I ran my thumb over the glossy surface, mesmerized. In Sarkovia, everything was gray, brown, or black. But in this picture, there was blue, green, and a promise of something else. Dara sat on the rug beside my chair, hugging her knees. She told me stories about Antoinette, a woman I had never met but instantly idolized. Antoinette had left the service of a grand family and traveled to France with nothing. Now she lived in a place called Montmartre, where artists painted in the streets and people danced until dawn. Dara described a life where a black woman could own her own shop, walk with her head high, and love whomever she wanted. "She says the air there smells like fresh bread and rain," Dara said, her eyes shining in the candlelight. "She says nobody cares who your father is. They only care about what you create." I listened, drinking in her words like water in a desert. Paris wasn't just a city on a map anymore. It was the anti-Sarkovia. It was a place where rules were made to be broken, not obeyed. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future that didn't involve a crown or a cage. We spent hours looking at that postcard. It became our secret talisman. When the pressure of the wedding preparations became too much, when my mother lectured me on the duties of a wife, I would catch Dara's eye across the room. We wouldn't say a word, but I knew we were both thinking of that iron tower. Paris became our code for freedom, a silent language that no one else in the castle could understand or decipher. But with every passing day, the fantasy grew more painful. The arrival of Prince Stefan was drawing closer, and with it, the terrifying reality of our separation. Once I was married, I would be moved to his estate in the north, hundreds of miles away. Dara would remain here, or worse, be sent to serve another family. The thought of waking up without her, of never feeling her hands in my hair again, made my chest ache with a physical pain. One night, the fear boiled over. "What will happen to us?" I asked into the darkness. We were sitting on the window seat, watching the snow fall. Dara didn't answer immediately. She looked out at the frozen landscape, her profile etched in moonlight. "I will stay here," she said finally, her voice devoid of hope. "I will fold your mother's dresses and polish the silver, and I will grow old remembering you." "I can't do it, Dara," I choked out, grabbing her hand. Her skin was warm, contrasting with the chill of the window pane. "I can't go with him. I can't live in a house with that monster, knowing you are here alone." She squeezed my fingers, hard. It wasn't a servant comforting a princess. It was a woman holding on to the only thing she loved. The unspoken truth hung heavy in the air. We were running out of time. The calendar on my wall seemed to mock me. 5 days until Stefan arrived. 7 days until the engagement ball. 14 days until the wedding. Each number crossed off felt like a step toward the gallows. I looked at the postcard one last time before Dara hid it away. The Eiffel Tower looked strong and unyielding. I realized then that I needed to be like that tower. I needed to stand tall, even if the world around me was trying to tear me down. The day before Prince Stefan arrived, the castle felt like a bomb waiting to explode. Servants were polishing the marble floors until they shone like glass, and the smell of roasting meats for the welcome feast permeated every corridor. I felt like a ghost haunting my own funeral. My father summoned me one last time to the throne room, not for a conversation, but for an inspection. He circled me like a general inspecting a soldier, his eyes critical, looking for any flaw in my posture, my hair, or my dress. "You look pale," he observed, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. "Pinch your cheeks before he enters. Stefan likes a woman with vitality, not a corpse." He reached out and adjusted the diamond necklace at my throat, his fingers cold and hard against my skin. It felt less like jewelry and more like a collar. "Tomorrow is the most important day of your life, Elena. Do not embarrass me. If you fail to charm him, you fail your country. Is that understood?" "Yes, father," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. He dismissed me with a wave of his hand, already turning back to his advisors to discuss tax levies. I walked out of the throne room with perfect poise, nodding to the guards. But the moment I turned the corner into the private wing, I started to run. The panic that had been simmering in my gut for weeks suddenly boiled over. I couldn't breathe. The corset of my dress felt like it was crushing my ribs, squeezing the life out of me. I tore at the collar of my dress as I ran, popping a button that skittered across the stone floor. I needed air. I needed to get out of this skin, out of this life. I burst into my bedroom, gasping for breath, my vision blurring with tears. I didn't even look to see if I was alone. I just collapsed against the door, sliding down until I hit the floor. I buried my face in my hands, trying to stifle the sobs that were threatening to tear my throat apart. "Elena." The voice was sharp with alarm. Dara dropped the pile of linens she was holding and rushed across the room. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask for permission. She fell to her knees beside me, her hands hovering for a split second before she grabbed my shoulders. "Breathe," she commanded, her voice firm but laced with terror. "Look at me. Just breathe." "I can't do it," I choked out, shaking uncontrollably. "I can't marry him. I'd rather die. Please, Dara, help me die." The hysteria was taking over. I clawed at the heavy fabric of my skirt, feeling trapped, feeling the walls closing in. I was drowning on dry land, and my father's expectations were the anchor dragging me down. Dara didn't try to argue with me. She did something she had never done before. She pulled me into her arms. She wrapped them around me tight, crushing me against her chest, holding me together when I was falling apart. It wasn't the tentative touch of a servant comforting a mistress. It was a fierce, protective embrace. I buried my face in the crook of her neck, smelling the soap and the clean, warm scent of her skin. For a long time, the only sound in the room was my ragged breathing and the ticking of the grandfather clock. I clung to her, my fingers digging into the rough fabric of her uniform. Slowly, the panic began to recede, replaced by a profound sense of safety. I realized that in a castle of 100 rooms and 1,000 servants, this was the only place I belonged. Right here, in the arms of the woman who brushed my hair. I could hear her heart beating fast against my ear. Thump, 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 thump. It was the most honest rhythm I had ever heard. My father had a heart of stone. Stefan had a heart of ice. But Dara was alive. She was warm. She was real. I stopped crying and just lay there, exhausted, letting her strength seep into my bones. "You're not going to die," she whispered into my hair, her chin resting on top of my head. Her hand moved up and down my back in long, soothing strokes. "We will figure this out. I won't let him hurt you. I promise." The ferocity in her voice surprised me. Dara, the invisible girl, the shadow in the corner, sounded like a warrior. I pulled back slightly, just enough to look at her. We were still on the floor, tangled together in a mess of silk and wool. Her face was inches from mine. I saw the fear in her eyes. Yes. But I also saw something else. A fierce, burning devotion that terrified and thrilled me. She didn't pull away. She didn't apologize for touching the crown princess. She just looked at me, her dark eyes searching mine. And in that silence, the air between us shifted from comfort to something far more dangerous. My heart hammered against my ribs. But this time, it wasn't from fear. I looked at her lips, then back up to her eyes, and I saw her breath hitch. The world outside, the king, the prince, the wedding, ceased to exist. There was only the girl in my arms, and the sudden, overwhelming realization that I didn't just need her to survive. I wanted her. The silence in the room was so thick it felt like a third person. I was still clinging to Dara, my hands bunching the rough fabric of her uniform at her waist. For 18 years, I had been taught that there was a line between us, a wall of granite built by blood and title that could never be crossed. But as I looked into her dark eyes, dilating in the dim light, that wall crumbled into dust. I didn't see a servant. I saw the only person who had ever looked at me and seen a human being instead of a crown. "Why do you stay?" I whispered, the question trembling in the air between us. My voice was barely audible, but in the quiet room, it sounded like a shout. "You could have left. You could have found a husband, a life away from this frozen tomb. Why are you still here, brushing the hair of a girl who can't even save herself?" I needed to know. I needed to understand why she was risking her heart for someone as powerless as me. Dara didn't look away. Her hand moved from my back to cup my cheek, her thumb brushing away a stray tear. Her skin was rough against my softness, a contrast that made my breath hitch. "Because you are not just a girl, Elena," she answered, her voice low and steady. "And you are not powerless. You have a fire inside you that this castle hasn't been able to extinguish. I stay because I want to be near the warmth of that fire." Her words hit me harder than any poem or song. My father called me weak. She called me fire. I leaned into her touch, closing my eyes, savoring the sensation of her palm against my skin. The space between our faces was shrinking, charged with a magnetic pull that terrified me. I knew the laws of God, and the laws of men forbade this. I knew that if my father walked in, we would both be destroyed. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care about the consequences. I opened my eyes and saw her gaze drop to my lips. It was a subtle movement, a fleeting confession of desire that mirrored my own. I stopped thinking. I stopped being the crown princess of Sarkovia. I leaned forward, closing the last inch between us, and pressed my lips to hers. It wasn't like the kisses I had read about in storybooks. It wasn't perfect or graceful. It was clumsy, salty with tears, and desperate. It was the collision of two starving souls finally finding sustenance. Dara froze for a heartbeat, shocked by my boldness. But then she melted. Her arms tightened around me, pulling me closer until there was no air left between us. Her lips were soft and warm, moving against mine with a tenderness that made my knees weak. The kiss deepened, becoming a silent conversation. It was a rebellion. With every second that our mouths were connected, I was committing treason against my father's plans. I was rejecting Prince Stefan, rejecting the throne, rejecting everything I was supposed to be. I was choosing her. I was choosing this feeling of electricity that started in my chest and radiated all the way to my fingertips. For the first time, I felt completely, undeniably alive. Suddenly, the heavy thud of boots echoed in the hallway outside. We broke apart instantly, gasping for air, our eyes wide with panic. The sound of the patrol passing by was a bucket of ice water on our fevered skin. We froze, like two deer caught in headlights, waiting for the doorknob to turn. If the guards came in now, if they saw the flushed skin and the tangled limbs, it would be over. Dara would be gone by morning. We listened as the footsteps faded away into the distance. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was dangerous. I looked at Dara, and I saw the fear mirroring my own, but I didn't see regret. She reached out and took my hand, lacing her fingers through mine. The grip was tight, possessive. We were conspirators now, bound by a secret that could get us killed. "I can't marry him, Dara," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "I can't let him touch me. Not after this. Not after knowing what it feels like to be touched with love." I squeezed her hand, willing her to understand the finality of my words. That kiss hadn't just comforted me, it had clarified everything. I belonged to her. My body, my heart, my loyalty. It was all hers. Dara nodded slowly. She pulled me up from the floor and we stood there, still holding hands, surrounded by the discarded silk of my ruined dress. She looked at the door where the guards had passed, then back at me. A hardness entered her eyes, a determination I had never seen before. "Then you won't," she said. "We won't let him have you." "But how?" I asked, looking around the room that was my prison. "My father controls everything. The guards, the gates, the money. There is no way out." I felt the despair creeping back in, but Dara stepped closer, forcing me to focus on her. "There is always a way out for those who are willing to lose everything to gain freedom," she whispered. She glanced toward the window, toward the dark outline of the stables visible in the moonlight. "You said Eclipse was fast. You said he was the wildest thing in the kingdom." She looked back at me, and a shiver went down my spine. Maybe it's time for the princess to be as wild as her horse. The engagement dinner that evening was a masterclass in torture. I was scrubbed, scented, and stuffed into a stiff brocade gown that weighed as much as a suit of armor. My mother pinned a heavy emerald tiara to my head, the sharp metal digging into my scalp, a constant reminder of the weight I was expected to carry. As I walked down the grand staircase to meet my future husband, I felt like I was walking to the gallows. But this time, I had a secret weapon. I had the memory of Dara's lips on mine, a hidden fire that kept me from freezing over completely. The dining hall was dimly lit by 1,000 candles, casting long, dancing shadows against the tapestries. Prince Stefan was waiting at the head of the table. In person, he was even more unsettling than in his portraits. He was a handsome man, in a sharp, cruel way, with pale eyes that seemed to strip me naked the moment I entered the room. He didn't smile when he bowed. He just assessed me, like a butcher eyeing a particularly fine cut of meat. I curtsied, my face a mask of porcelain perfection, while my stomach churned with nausea. Dinner was a slow, agonizing affair. My father and Stefan dominated the conversation, discussing hunting, taxes, and the suppression of peasant revolts in the south. I was not expected to speak, only to look decorative and eat my soup without slurping. I sat there, breaking my bread into tiny crumbs, trying to make myself disappear. Every time Stefan looked at me, I felt a layer of slime coating my skin. He didn't ask me about my interests or my thoughts. To him, I was already property, acquired and paid for. Dara was in the room, moving silently among the other servants, refilling wine glasses. It was agony to see her treating me with formal deference, pouring water into my goblet without meeting my eyes. But every time she passed behind Stefan's chair, I saw her grip on the pitcher tighten. We were communicating without words, a silent frequency of fear and resolve. I kept my eyes on her hands, those strong, capable hands that had held me on the floor just hours before. They were my anchor in this sea of sharks. The conversation took a dark turn when the roast was served. Stefan leaned back in his chair, picking his teeth with a silver toothpick. and turned his cold gaze toward me for the first time. "I hear you enjoy riding, Elena," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Your father tells me you have a fondness for that black beast in the stables. Eclipse, is it?" I stiffened, my fork hovering halfway to my mouth. "He is a magnificent animal, Your Highness," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the sudden pounding of my heart. "He is fast and loyal." My father shot me a warning glare, but I didn't care. I needed to know what this man intended for the only other living thing I loved. Stefan laughed, a harsh barking sound that made the other guests flinch. "Loyalty is for dogs, my dear. Horses are tools. And that one is dangerous." I took a look at him before dinner. Too wild. Unpredictable. He took a sip of wine, looking at me over the rim of the glass with a cruel glint in his eyes. "I've already told my men to clear out your stables before we leave. We'll get rid of the dangerous stock. That black devil will be the first to go. A bullet between the eyes is cheaper than feed." The room went silent. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving me cold and trembling. He was going to kill Eclipse. He wasn't just going to sell him. He was going to execute him, simply because the horse had a spirit that couldn't be broken. Just like me. I looked at my father, begging silently for him to intervene, but he just nodded in agreement, eager to please his new son-in-law. "A wise decision, Stefan," my father said. "Elena needs to focus on her duties as a wife, not galloping around like a wild Indian." That was the moment the last chain snapped. Until that second, running away had been a desperate, half-formed fantasy. Now, it was a necessity. It was a rescue mission. I wasn't just saving myself from a loveless marriage. I was saving Eclipse from a death sentence. I looked up, meeting Dara's eyes across the room. She had heard it too. She was standing by the sideboard, her face pale, giving me a microscopic nod. She understood. It had to be tonight. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. I excused myself early, pleading a migraine brought on by the excitement. Stefan kissed my hand before I left, his lips wet and cold against my skin. It took every ounce of my willpower not to wipe my hand on my dress right in front of him. "Rest well, princess," he whispered, his breath smelling of wine and onions. "Tomorrow, you belong to me." I walked back to my room with the dignity of a queen, but the moment the door clicked shut, I exploded into action. Dara was already there, waiting. We didn't waste time with tears or hugs. The threat to Eclipse had galvanized us. We moved with the synchronized efficiency of a team that had been preparing for this all our lives. "He means to kill him in the morning," I hissed, tearing the diamond tiara from my head and throwing it onto the bed. "I know," Dara said, her voice calm and steel-hard. She was already pulling clothes out of the back of the wardrobe, breeches, heavy wool sweaters, and thick socks. "The guards change shifts at 3 a.m. That gives us a 10-minute window when the courtyard is blind." She handed me a pair of trousers that belonged to my brother, stolen weeks ago for this very purpose. We dressed in silence, layering clothes to protect against the biting snow. I went to the small safe hidden behind a painting of my grandmother. My hands shook as I dialed the combination, praying I wouldn't forget the numbers in my panic. The door swung open, revealing stacks of cash in my mother's jewelry box. I dumped everything into a leather satchel. Gold, rubies, diamonds. I didn't care about their beauty, only that they could buy us bread and train tickets. "Are you sure, Elena?" Dara asked, pausing with her hand on the doorknob. She looked at me, dressed in men's clothes, my hair braided tight against my head. "Once we walk out of this room, there is no coming back. If they catch us, they will hang me and lock you in a tower until you rot." I looked at the luxurious room that had been my cage for 18 years. I looked at the dress I was supposed to wear tomorrow, hanging like a ghost in the corner. Then I looked at Dara, the woman who loved me enough to risk the gallows. I would rather die in the snow with you than live one more day in this castle without you, I said. I grabbed the satchel and blew out the candle, plunging us into darkness. Let's go get our horse. The castle at 3 a.m. was a different beast entirely. It wasn't the majestic palace of the day. It was a labyrinth of shadows and creaking floorboards. We moved through the service corridors like ghosts, our boots wrapped in rags to muffle the sound of our steps. I could hear my own heartbeat thumping against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that seemed loud enough to wake the dead. Dara led the way, holding a small lantern with the shutter almost closed, allowing only a sliver of light to guide us. She knew these tunnels better than the king himself. She knew which stones were loose and which hinges squeaked. We froze every time the wind rattled a window pane. The fear of being caught was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to draw a full breath. If we were found now, dressed in men's clothes with a bag full of stolen jewels, there would be no explanation that could save us. I would be locked in the tower. And Dara, I couldn't even let my mind finish that thought. I focused on the back of her head, on the steady way she moved. She was my compass in this sea of darkness. We reached the heavy oak door that led to the kitchen gardens. This was the most dangerous part. We had to cross the open courtyard to get to the stables, and for 50 yards, we would be exposed to the eyes of any guard patrolling the walls. Dara killed the light of the lantern. She turned to me, her face barely visible in the gloom, and squeezed my hand. Her grip was iron strong. "Stay low," she whispered, her breath forming a cloud in the freezing air. "Run when I run." We burst out into the night. The cold hit us like a slap, sharp and biting. The snow was falling heavily, which was a blessing and a curse. It hid us from sight, but it would make the riding treacherous. We sprinted across the cobblestones, slipping on the ice, bending our bodies against the wind. I didn't look up at the battlements. I kept my eyes on the stable doors, praying to a god I hadn't spoken to in years that they would be unlocked. They were not. The heavy iron padlock was fastened tight. Panic flared in my chest, hot and blinding. I looked at Dara, my eyes wide. We hadn't accounted for this. The grooms usually left the side door unlatched for the morning feed. Dara didn't panic. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a long, thin piece of wire. "My father was a locksmith before he was a servant," she murmured, her hands working fast despite the cold. "Keep watch." I stood with my back to the door, scanning the courtyard. The snow was falling faster now, turning the world into a blur of white. I thought I saw a shadow move near the gatehouse, and my heart stopped. I held my breath, clutching the leather satchel to my chest, waiting for a shout or a gunshot. But it was just a flag snapping in the wind. Behind me, there was a soft click, the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Dara pulled the heavy door open, and we slipped inside, the smell of hay and warm horseflesh welcoming us like a sanctuary. Eclipse was awake. He snorted as we approached his stall, sensing my presence. Animals know when things are changing. They can smell the adrenaline on your skin. I entered the stall and pressed my face against his warm neck for a second, whispering apologies for waking him. "We're going on an adventure, boy," I told him, my voice trembling. "You have to be quiet." We worked in frantic silence, throwing the saddle onto his back and tightening the girth. He didn't fight us. It was as if he knew that his life, and ours, depended on his cooperation. Leading him out was the terrifying part. His hooves on the stone floor sounded like thunderclaps in the quiet night. We moved slowly, inch by inch, guiding him toward the rear exit that opened into the forest. Dara pushed the doors open, and the winter wind howled in, swirling snow around the horse's legs. Eclipse danced nervously, but I held him steady. We were at the point of no return. Behind us lay safety, warmth, and a life of misery. Ahead lay the frozen dark and the unknown. I mounted first, swinging my leg over the saddle with a grace I had never been allowed to show in public. I reached down and pulled Dara up behind me. She wrapped her arms around my waist, pressing her chest against my back. I could feel her shivering, not just from the cold, but from the enormity of what we were doing. "Ready?" I asked, gripping the reins. "Ready?" she whispered against my ear. I kicked Eclipse's flanks, and we surged forward into the snow. We didn't trot. We galloped. We had to put as much distance between us and the castle as possible before the sun rose. The forest was a blur of black trees and white ground. The wind roared in my ears, tearing at my eyes, but I didn't blink. I leaned forward, urging Eclipse faster, trusting him to find the path. Every muscle in my body was tense, waiting for the sound of pursuing horses. But there was only the wind and the rhythmic pounding of hooves on the snow-packed earth. We rode for what felt like hours, until the castle was nothing but a bad memory behind us. My hands were numb, frozen into claws around the reins, and my face felt like it was made of ice. But beneath the physical pain, there was a fire burning. It was the thrill of rebellion. For the first time in 18 years, I wasn't doing what I was told. I was flying through the night with the woman I loved holding on to me, on the horse they said was too dangerous to keep. We reached the old industrial depot near the border, just as the sky began to turn a bruised purple with the dawn. A freight train was idling on the tracks, belching gray smoke into the air. It was a cattle train, headed west to France. This was our ticket out. We rode up to a sliding door that was slightly ajar. It was madness to try and load a horse, but I wasn't leaving Eclipse behind. With desperation fueling our strength, we coaxed him up the ramp into the dark, straw-filled car. The train gave a sudden lurch and a metallic groan. We scrambled inside just as the wheels began to turn. I slid the heavy wooden door shut, leaving only a crack for air. We collapsed into the straw, gasping for breath, our bodies tangled together. The train picked up speed, the rhythmic clack-clack of the wheels on the tracks signaling the end of our old lives. I looked at Dara in the dim light. We were dirty, freezing, and homeless criminals. But as she reached out and took my hand, smiling through her exhaustion, I knew I was finally free. We have escaped the cage, but the world outside is vast and dangerous. Will we survive the cold? Will the king's men find us before we reach Paris? And can a princess truly learn to live without her crown? Join us for part 2 of this story, to find out how far 2 women will go to protect the life they built from scratch.